Okay.
All right, welcome everybody to the meeting of January for the Ozark Fly Fishers. Please put yourself on mute if Jacob hasn't already. Do we have any among us? Apparently not. Do we have any guests among us? Nobody's that brave. Okay, anybody got any good fishing reports or bad ones? Quiet group. Well, I was out of Westover and did okay using a crackleback, actually, that I was given as part of our fly exchange. Did pretty good there, and it was all right. I've been there a few times this year already, and so we'll move on. Education, is Jim here? I don't see Jim. Okay, how about conservation? Scott Darrow.
Don't think so.
All right. Treasurer, Steve Lekich. Oh, I saw Steve.
I'm here.
There you go. Speak up.
I just had to mute. We really don't have hardly any activities. I mean, we got a couple of membership, new members that Al can speak to. And really the only thing that happened for this month is we renewed our membership, affiliate membership with Fly Fishers International. And really, guys, that's about it. The deposits that we had for some of our activities that were canceled due to COVID, we've gotten gift certificates and receipts for to be used in the future when COVID goes away. The books are reconciled and are in balance with the bank statement. And really, that's about it. There's not much activity going on. Keeping the books up is pretty simple right now.
Easy peasy. All right. And anything in the mailbox?
Nope. Like I said, I think I've got the 5 magazines from Fly Fishers International that I'm going to try to distribute to some of the guys and pass around. But beyond that, and the membership dues for the affiliate membership for FFI, really, that's all we've gotten.
All right. Sounds good. Any questions for Steve? All right. Membership. Al, you there?
I think he was driving. Al, try not to kill yourself going off mute. We might have lost Al.
Okay. Moving on. Jerry, Ways and Means.
Jerry, you're on mute if you're talking.
Okay,
There it
I have
is.
nothing to report.
Okay. Ed Olander, he was the one having difficulties signing on. I know we have 2 things going on right now. First off is that Rick Babel's taking over for Ed, effective officially February 15th. We have the FYAO down at Montauk, which really is just 8 rooms that are reserved, and members have to call up the lodge individually to get those rooms. They're the good ones. Room 1 through 8, they have the microwave and the refrigerator. They're upgraded. And I don't know that anybody's done that yet, but it's still available and up until maybe Friday or something like that tomorrow.
Yeah, the RSVP deadline, I think, for that one is February 1st.
Okay, February 1st. Okay. And the other thing we have going on is Lily's Landing. We have rooms reserved down there too. And when I spoke to Ed today, he said we need to move on that if we want to get them, because they'll release them before long. So that's something else. I don't know the date on that one. So
That one RSVP is February 14th.
okay. Oh, so those are the dates for the outings. Everything else is on hold right now. We're looking to get back into it maybe this fall. I don't know exactly how that's going to work out, but everything else is pretty much on hold for now.
And all of the outing information, the dates, the RSVPs, everything is all in the off calendar on the website. So if you do have any questions about when an outing is, it's been updated.
And one more note, Ways and Means, Chris Reason is going to be taking over for Jerry officially February 15th. So that's something else that we'll have to notice. All right, Steve Antonik, any reports? Steve?
I don't think he has his earbuds in.
No, people are calling me about problems. I'm trying to straighten them out, and they
Ah.
shifted over to my earbuds. And then I realized I hear Dan going, Steve, and I go, oops, he must be talking to me. Because we still have some issues, Jake, and I don't know what the deal is.
Hang on,
people
there's
that can't hear us and can't, they see us but can't hear. I think that's weird, but okay. Dan, what did you ask me? Did you ask me about OFF? I mean, FFF?
No, I just asked for your report. That's all.
Okay. On the federation part of it, it's the same deal. They've canceled everything for the rest of the year. Since there's nothing really happens in the fourth quarter, it don't look like there'll be there for sure is not going to be a conclave both nationally and in the Southern Council. I think they're really kind of shooting for next year. They're just giving up on 21 altogether. So as far as the FFI goes, it's kind of dead in the water. That's it.
Thanks for the good news. All right.
Hey, Dan, as soon as we hear something, we will put it out in case
certainly.
anybody wants to go to any of this stuff.
Certainly. Yeah, I understand. It's all on hold right now, but we're trying to get a few things here and there. All right, from my end of view, if we like, we have some patches available for the 50-year anniversary. They're available. We're putting something out there pretty soon about a website, I think. I also would like, if everyone could, especially the old timers, to write up a little page on the experiences of the club going back to the old days. And I'm going to try to put together a book, a little history book of sorts for our 50th. That's something else I'm going to try to be working on. I'm also working on a speaker for our March anniversary, and I'm trying to get Jay Nixon, who's a pretty, used to be governor and used to be still an outdoorsman of sorts. And that's what I'm kind of working on. I will be going on vacation February 13th for a week, so I'll be gone. So officially, I guess Dave Crawford will be in charge of very little anyway, but he'll be in charge, so I can blame him. So, and with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Crawford, and he will introduce our speaker then. Dave?
So Dave, I can't hear you. It's not saying you're on mute. So I'm not sure what the
Here,
problem is.
try that.
Oh, that's good.
Okay. I wanted to say for next month, Steve Sudurska arranged to have Al Beatty do some fly tie-in for us, and that'll be on February 10th, which is not the fourth Thursday, but it's what it's going to be. And I appreciate Mike working that out. And then tonight we have Steve Ehrlich. And Steve, if you can take it away, that would be great.
Great. Well, thanks. Appreciate everybody. I saw Dan last week, I guess, at Westover, and we were talking a little bit about some of the stuff I'm doing. And he said that you guys had an opening, and he was kind enough to say, I think people might be interested in it. So let me first tell you just real quickly a little bit about me. I've actually been a member of this group for a while, attended the meetings when you were meeting in person, but up until a few months ago, I had that thing called a job that I had to do. I've been working at WashU for over 25 years and retired November the 1st. My career has largely been one in continuing ed. So I worked with the evening division there, University College, for a lot of years, and always been interested because of that in creating and managing programs for adults. My background is in psychology and learning. So I was always interested in how we learn, what we learn, what's important to us all our lives. And I've been a fly fisher all my life, and probably the past 10 years, been doing just a lot of reading and putting together courses and presentations, essentially taking this idea of stories from the stream and taking the literature of fly fishing and helping to translate that into lessons for living and for working, and try to adapt that to as many different groups as I can. It's all very informal, but I'd like to think that I've always had kind of two parallel careers going on. One was with WashU, and then the second one was sort of doing a similar kind of thing, only aside from the fishing, interested in kind of why we do it. I've more recently been teaching classes that WashU at the Lifelong Learning Institute, various kinds of fly fishing literature classes, the history of it, and just kind of an anthology of the literature. I did a close read of A River Runs Through It, and got another course coming up in March, kind of a walkthrough of the literature, just really for fun, just giving everybody a chance to read it and react to it, and trying to get a book club going through Westover as well. And there's more information on that I can give to you later if you're interested. So I've been doing this for a number of years, and now that I'm retired, those of you who are there, I'm just having a hell of a great time fishing more, and reading and thinking about all this stuff a little bit more. So I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of this. As all of us, I think, know, excuse me, who read this literature as well as fishing, there are kind of two general kinds of fly fishing literature. The one that I have tended to read most of up until recently has been the sort of the how. So, it's all the great books on how to fish and how to tie and how to cast, and, all of the learning centers that we all go to, like Orbis, for example. Most of them have great books and great videos on this. And then there's the other kind of literature, and that's what, I'll call kind of reflective. And that's really what I'm most interested in now. And it's not so much the how, it's the why. The other thing that's been really interesting is as I've taught this more, I tend to be talking more with people who are like us. I mean, kind of either retired or their second half of life. And these questions and themes I found are particularly acute. They're particularly acute for people like us who, whether we talk about it or not, think about these kinds of things a lot. And fishing tends to be the window and tends to be the trigger for some of these things. So that's kind of what interests me. Actually, most of the what I'll do tonight, I think the best way is not for me to sort of tell you why I think it's great to fish. We all know that, or why I think all this literature, but a chunk of tonight is actually, I thought it's just best if I just read to you, not great amounts, but some of the selections that I find to be just really, really compelling and really inspiring, that I think answer the question why we do this thing we do and why we do it a lot of the time. And so that's really what a lot of this is going to be. And then I'll kind of do some summaries of why I think it's important. There's a sort of a 2-page book, and Jake, you have one of the attachments. I've got about a 2-page summary of sort of my favorite books. I'm happy to send that on to whoever wants it, either through Dan or you've got my email. You can request it through Dan. Or my email is actually on this. If you have something to write with, it's my name. It's Steve Ehrlich 76 at Gmail, SteveEhrlich 76. And Jacob's got the one of the attachments has the book list and my name and contact information as well. So Jake, you can either throw that up now or wait till the end of this. But if you're more interested, I'm happy to get information to you, as well as information on that upcoming book club through Westover, which supposed to begin on February 10th. And that's going to be on Wednesdays every week for about 8 weeks if we could do it, 10 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock. And there's more information on that as well. So anyway,
So
that's
Steve, real quick, I can also throw this on our website for anybody
is
who's curious.
great.
With your
Great.
permission.
Please do.
That might be the best way.
And at the end, there's a 2-page. If you scroll down at the end of the second page is my contact information. And there, yeah, there's a picture of me with a nice brown trout out of the big hole in Montana.
And I will
But
drop
that's
your email and info in the chat for everybody.
awesome. Thank you. And there are tons more books, but those are kind of my go-tos. So thank you. Okay. So one of the books on there, a great book written by a guy's name is Mark Browning. It's called Haunted by Waters. It was written some time ago. And he doesn't fish so much anymore, but he's written, I still think, the best. If you're interested in reading critiques of the literature, it's one of the best things. It's on that list. And so here's what he says. It's a good way to, I think, start this off. He says, at the heart of both fishing and writing, there exists a mystery. The desire to map out this territory is what brings water and reader to the text. So it's a mystery. Just as the desire to master the water is what brings the angler to the river. However, at a deeper level, it is the unknowability of this region that maintains the fascination of these pursuits. So his whole premise is there's a certain mystery, a certain unknowability to fly fishing that kind of draws us all there. And, his book is great if you want to read more about that. But let's sort of turn now to what I think are some great illustrations. And we'll start with the obvious, A River Runs Through It, Norman Maclean. And so what I'm going to do is just read a couple of lines, not the famous end of it, as you all know that. But I think A River Runs Through It is great for a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons is it raises more questions than answers. So that's one of the reasons I think why this literature and why we do what we do. It poses questions. So Maclean poses what he calls like the haunting questions of life. And in that short story, he said, it isn't fly fishing if you're not looking for answers to questions. And in a related line, how can a question be answered that asks a lifetime of questions? And probably the story of the two brothers. And what are the questions that story raises? It raises questions that I think are compelling and universal for all of us. Some of them are these. How do we reconcile faith and doubt? How do we come to grips with hope and despair, love and loss, that they actually occur throughout our entire life? How do we come to terms with that? Another question raised there is, why is it the people that we love and care about the most elude us and fool us the most? Other questions, why is it so difficult to seek help, to fail? What frightens me? How do I avoid fears? Why is change both very liberating, but also very intimidating? How do I manage the uncertainties in my life, the things that I really never will know? Why do I strive for control and perfection in my life? Is there an unlived part of my life that haunts me? How do I live more for others than myself? Where do I get stuck? Anyway, these are sort of the questions when I teach this book, this story that we talk about in the class. And, if you read about Norman Maclean and why he wrote this, these are really quite pertinent to his interests, and I think to all of ours. So, but other people have talked a little bit about A River Runs Through It. And, again, here's just a couple of key themes and why it seems to be so important. One of them is this constant back and forth between understanding the water and understanding the words that try to explain the water. So in A River Runs Through It, the idea of the river, the river poses, the background of the story. It represents the flow of experience. It represents nature. It represents memories of the past that continually flow into the present and sometimes threaten people. So the river is kind of, the sort of the natural and unpredictable and mysterious flow of life that poses all of these questions. The words, Norman Maclean's, people who have written about this, the words are the attempt of Maclean and us to understand, to deal with, and to somehow, control this river. How do we understand it? And the only way we can do it is through the expression of our words. And again, there's much more that people have said about that. That's a big theme. The other theme that comes out in this story that I think strikes a lot of people who read it is this whole notion of life is really full of contradictions and paradoxes. It's full of things that seem to be opposites that can never easily be fixed. And how do we tangle through this all? So, for example, In a River Runs Through It, it's the story of two brothers, Norman and Paul. And without getting into the whole story, they're very different people, but they coexist. They're both important people. Norman, the writer, represents the inquisitive guy who's a big thinker, and Paul represents, his brother who tragically is murdered, but is the intuitive, creative guy on the stream, the artistic one. How do they both live together? So it's, again, this contradiction between kind of our head and our heart, between thinking and intuition. Notions of like upstream and downstream. When we think about what that means when we fish, it also gets played out in this story. Connection and separation. How are people both connected? How are people connected and at the same time separate from one another? How are we always connected to the ecosystem that we fish? And at the same time, how are we very different from it? Conservation and consumption. As anglers, most of us are stewards of the environment, but we also try to consume and sometimes kill the fish. So this idea of conservation and consumption. In A River Runs Through It, the first line, in our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing. Again, it sort of sets up this paradox. How are these things that seem so different? How do we come to terms with this in that story? And as I mentioned earlier, how do we come to terms with the fact that you need both faith and doubt? There's love and there's loss. There's life and there's death. Ultimately, that's what the story is about. And what Norman Maclean is trying to do is not answer those questions, but to help us kind of deal with the middle ground and the uncertainty and the mystery and learn how to tolerate all of these contradictions. Another theme in that book that appeals to a lot of people is the idea of helping and healing. That we try so hard to help so many people that don't want it or don't need it. We often can't accept help as well. And, as I mentioned earlier, ultimately, one of the themes of that book is this whole notion is the last line of the book. It's not A River Runs Through It. It's the last line, which is, I am haunted by waters. And, I think what Maclean is saying there is that eventually all things merge into one. There is a kind of resolution in all of this uncertainty. But in a sort of crazy way, he says the best resolution is, I am haunted. I've got to accept the mystery, the uncertainty, the tension, and being able to live and accept that, in his views, is more important than finding an easy answer. So anyway, A River Runs Through It. Then we turn to another classic, The River Why, by David James Duncan, that was written in the early 80s. Well, this is an interesting story. Those of you who have read it, it's a story about a young man who grows up with parents. One of them is a fly fisher, and the other, and his mother is a bait fisherman. And again, you've got this, opposites. But this is a story about a man who finally finds peace and balance and equilibrium. And I'm just going to read one quick quote from The River Why. at the end, he's playing this this Chinook, and he plays it into the night, and he says, as my walking and waiting and attending to the line became less conscious, more free and easy, I found I could free my mind. Talking about an ancient equilibrium derived from a kind of inner balance. It transmitted itself from the soul to the mind and from the mind to the body. And when a man possessed of it, put his hand to an art or craft, he was capable of unheard of feats. A line breaks at a stress point, but if the fisherman experiences no stress, and if he transmits this experience through his hands to his pole, to his line, to his hook, then there will be no stress point. Therefore, no point at which the strand can break. So, again, it's a kind of an interesting thing. We've all played fish. We know the tension. And what he's pointing out here, this is in part the theme of this story, finding that peace, that balance, that equilibrium in the tension. So going back to McLean, the value of that tension, as we experience tension when we play a fish, that equilibrium, there's actually a point where you reach a kind of a stress-free point, and both physically and mentally. That's so the River Why is worth looking at. Tom McGuane, another great author. For me, one of his greatest is The Longest Silence. And there he talks about a lot of things, but self-awareness and self-understanding. And here's McGuane. Early on, I decided that fishing would be my way of looking at the world. First, it taught me how to look at rivers. Lately, it has been teaching me how to look at people, myself included. To the reader accustomed to the sort of instructional fishing writing, which I myself enjoy, I must seem to have gotten very far afield. I simply feel that the frontier of angling is no longer either technical or geographical. The Bible tells us to watch and to listen. Something like this suggests what fishing ought to be about, using the ceremony of our sport and passion to arouse greater reverberations within ourselves. I think it's a great excerpt. Friend of mine, Wayne Fields, who's retired from WashU, former dean of the division that I worked with, an English teacher, wrote a great book, What the River Knows, an angler in midstream, about going through a midlife crisis. And he in particular talks about confronting change and the fear of change, another theme that comes out in all of this literature. And Wayne says, to sit by a river is to enjoy the fittest place for contemplation, even as one awaits a struggle with whatever monster might reside within those depths. I have maintained the illusion of control, the dream of constancy. Change has always been the enemy, the old dilemma. I want something to happen, but nothing to change. And again, a great insight inspired by fly fishing. Harry Middleton has written a number of things. I'm just going to share with you a brief quote from The Earth is Enough. And this is how he kind of uses fishing to face uncertainty, confusion, and complexity. Another reason why some people do this. And here's what Harry Middleton says. The challenge never dulled. The thrill never faded. The reward was angling itself, just meeting the trout in its world on its own terms, feeling the tenuous nature of its life, and suddenly understanding the tenuousness of your own. It's a great insight about, in a sense, how small we all are. One of my favorite authors, Ted Leeson, has written a number of things, but the two books that I think are great, one is The Habit of Rivers, and here's a brief quote from that, in which, again, you'll see where he goes. This is Ted Leeson, The Habit of Rivers. Trout streams tug at the mind with an insistent, contradictory pull, presenting both a plain and perfect simplicity and a subtle link to the sources of hidden significance. Fundamentally alike, yet endlessly variable, They offer the solace of the familiar and the inexhaustible fascination of a thing that can never be fully known. So again, he finds, comfort in this kind of unknown quantity known as the river. And in Ted Leeson in this, I think there's a recognition of hope, faith, of assurance, even in the face of our own conflicts and an uncertain world. He wrote another great book earlier, actually, Jerusalem Creek. And this is Ted Leeson as well. And this is great. A lot of the writers describe the river and how rivers actually are symbols for our own lives. And fishing is the same way. So listen how Ted Leeson describes it as he uses the concept of meandering. There's actually a chapter in this book called Meandering. And here's Ted Leeson. Meandering is the curve of curiosity and exploration, and sometimes of discovery. Aggressive and indirect, obedient to an inner logic of its own, but open to serendipity, its own justification because it answers to something elemental in nature, human and otherwise. Now here, now there. A meander is the lack of interesting conversation, the tack of interesting conversation, the turn of unhurried musing, the unpremeditated detours of an aimless walk, the afternoon circuit of a well-fed dog with no appointments. Meandering is the shape of youth with time on its hands, when the years are still a given, life's automatic entitlement, and the hours not yet a currency to be saved and invested and spent in the calculus of cost benefit with an eye toward economy and value. Later, when life gains velocity and assumes a more predictable trajectory, meandering grows more difficult. While a few still manage it, most of us are driven to simulate it in peculiar oxymoronic behaviors, planning for unplanned time, forcing ourselves to relax, running to stand still. But in those years before the present becomes enslaved to some ever-receding future, one is blissfully unshackled from the value of things, of $1 or a day, and things are free to acquire their own value. All time is now, and a day merely the meandering arc of moments laid end to end. Sometimes youth does indeed seem wasted on the young. Then again, it's all they really have. So it's great. Leeson is really talking about our lives as meandering. And he takes his inspiration by looking at the meandering characteristic of a river. And, it's a marvelous way of finding meaning. There's a guy that isn't read that much, but I like him a lot, Robert DeMott. And he's written a couple of things. Angling Days is one. And listen how he talks about his own identity, finding humility, and confronting these contradictions. So this is from Robert DeMott, Angling Days. More and more, I realize the truth of Thoreau's proclamation. And Henry David Thoreau made a very famous proclamation that we fish all our lives without knowing that it isn't fish we are really after. It's something deeper, larger, and more lasting. Something like a genuine way of being in the world. Something like becoming part of a web of circumstances that humbles us at the very moment it ennobles us. Stand anywhere in that dazzling, interlaced, riverine cornucopia where fish, birds, mammals, and insects, down to the smallest midges, thrive. And it is possible to see that there are rare days when even the tiniest things seem connected to everything else. And the smallest gesture, the thinnest filament, is not an inconsequential integer, but is linked to the whole fabric of earth, sky, and water. That's Robert DeMott, Angling Days. And he goes on to say, fly fishing is like everything else, and unlike everything else. In attempting to define fly fishing, all streams lead to paradox. And paradox is the perplexing, challenging element that quickens fly fishing's appeal, value, cachet, and especially its strenuous hold on our imaginations. Again, the same kind of how do we live in this world of paradoxes, the same thing Norman MacLean. There's a book, I think probably just one or two others, just came out a few months ago. Very new author. His name is Steve Ramirez. Wrote a book called, his first book, Casting Forward. It's a beautiful book. It's written about him and his daughter actually fishing all of the streams of all thing in Texas. And he's a former Marine who turned police captain, I think. And he decided that he needed to go back to his home waters in Texas to figure out what became of his life. So let me just read a few things from this, and I'd really recommend this book. Again, Steve Ramirez, Casting Forward. Here's what he says. Whenever I see my own reflection, I see what is behind the lines that radiate from weary eyes. Nature reminds me. The river teaches me to remember. The river keeps me balanced. Little by little, I'm buying my life back. I invest in life each day. There is no such thing as someday. There is only this moment, only this day. Life happens. It isn't bad or good. It just is. Each of us can either look out the window wishing we could live, or we can go out the side door and just go do it. The first step is to stop thinking and begin to understand the wrongness of complexity. Life is simple, and we need to keep it that way. The second step is to start letting go of things, including expectations. I have let go of unreasonable expectations and have learned to take life in stride. The boy I once was is far wiser than the man I've allowed myself to become. It's time to go backward until I find the original me, back at the headwaters of being alive. Perhaps fly fishing through uncertainty didn't teach me anything about where I'm going or what comes next. Perhaps what I have learned is not where to go, but rather how to be. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson anyone can ever learn. I have learned to be grateful. I have learned that hearing birdsong as the sun rises or sets and seeing starlight as I drift into dreams has more value than any artifact of human hands. We all live a mayfly life. We must live authentically now while we still have wings. And that's Steve Ramirez, Casting Forward. Really a fantastic book. And finally, so there are all of these, these are fairly kind of heavy topics and themes, but much of the literature also reminds us that, we can't take this all too seriously. Nick Lyon, another great author in a famous book, Spring Creek, he says this: I'd like it to be fun because fly fishing is fun. Not ever so serious and self-conscious that I take it to be either a religion or a way of life or a source of salvation. I like it passionately, but I try to remember what Cezanne once said: after a happy day of fishing, he'd had lots of fun, but it doesn't lead too far. And for me, it's always useful to remember at the end of the day that the meditative aspect of all this, I have found very, very helpful. And I found that other people, particularly at our stage of life, think about these. But, if I lose track of the fun of it, it's no good at all. So, it's sort of in summary, for me, all of this literature just represents how fly fishing can increase our self-awareness. It can help us sort of discover or rediscover, who we are, what we love, how we balance our own lives with other people's lives and with society. It can help to heal in many ways. It can help to restore a sense of our roots to nature, the importance of conservation and environmental stewardship, the importance of solitude and meditation. Herman Melville, who many of you know, wrote what some people think is the greatest American novel, Moby Dick. So a big fish, it's not really a fish. I guess a whale is a mammal, right? But Melville wrote, meditation and water are wedded forever. And that's really kind of neat when you think about that. Moby Dick, there's all sorts of things that are studies on Moby Dick as and what that means, obviously, on a larger scale. But meditation and water are wedded forever. That's Herman Melville. There are a lot of people who write about the spiritual aspect of fishing, and tons of books on that. A couple on the list that I gave you. And again, as I mentioned, this whole idea of learning to live with contradiction and paradox. Many people refer to as the tension of opposites. Where most of us live. I mean, life is in the gray zone. It's not easy. It's messy. It's in that zone between things that seem to be, irreconcilable differences. And finally, if you just take a look at some people have written about the act of fishing itself and how it represents kind of lessons for our daily lives and our work. There's a guy by the name of David Van Wee. He wrote a book called Storied Waters. He's got a website and a blog that he wrote called Fly Fishing to Excellence. And he basically takes these following themes and describes how you can use these themes about how we fish with how we run our lives, how we run our businesses, how we solve problems. And he says things like fish to the fish, know where the fish are. Think of the lessons in that. We have to kind of know where we're going as we're fishing, in the same way that we have to sort of know how to choose our battles and know where to really find the things we're looking for. Match the hatch, obviously. We all know what that means. And as we go about our daily lives, to be able to approach it in a sort of a logical way, so that we're actually solving our problems with the tools that we need. He talks about using enough rod, using the right equipment, similar idea. Fish the foam line. He goes on, fish the phone line and mend the line. And he talks about a number of different strategies. And in all of these, it's really sort of taking fishing as a metaphor for being able to approach the choices we make in our lives and in our work. And fishing has some very, very strong lessons in that. And finally, he says, he calls it the contrarian strategy. And it's got a lot to do with this opposites. If something you're trying doesn't work, try the opposite, because it may very well work, as we know, in fishing. And this is a quote from David Van Wee when he talks about watching your backcast. He says, time and again, as we try to extend our reach, and he's talking about this in terms of our work lives and our home lives, we fail to account for other aspects of our enterprise that are a critical part of moving forward, some of them predictable, but not in our line of sight. And so we run into unexpected and untimely snags. It's kind of interesting. So some very practical lessons for working and living in our fishing. Well, that's again, that's kind of a very, very quick overview of why I love this literature. And, I hope that it at least gives you a sort of a bit of a window into why this can be, helpful for so many reasons. Why the why of why we fish may be, as sometimes even more important than how we fish. So with that, again, I really thank you for your time. I love going on and on about this stuff, but you do have to shut me up. But I really appreciate the time. And again, I think that Jacob, you're going to post on the website the reading list, and I think as well as maybe a flyer about the upcoming Westover Book Club. But
Yeah,
if
and
you,
I can share the flyer now. I just brought that up.
sure.
There we go.
So what that's going to be basically is reading and just talking about those two first books, A River Runs Through It and The River Why. And then the other things we're going to be looking at, and with the exception of these two, I'm going to be distributing the rest of it by email to everybody. But we're going to look at Ernest Hemingway, Big Two-Hearted River. And then we're going to look at excerpts from Spring Creek by Nick Lyons, excerpts from The Habit of Rivers by Ted Leeson, Jerusalem Creek by Ted Leeson, The Longest Silence by Thomas McGuane, Harry Middleton, The Earth is Enough, excerpts from this Casting Forward book that I had mentioned, excerpts from Angling Days, and a few other of the sort of classic fly fishing authors. It's going to be Zoom, and unlike now, it's really going to be. I'm going to simply act as a facilitator. Hopefully, people will read these brief things, and I'm just interested in hearing what people want to talk about. So, if you're interested, give it a look. And again, thanks very much. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions? I'm happy to take that on now if you want to take a few more minutes.
And guys, if you do have a question, make sure you take yourself off mute. So Steve, I noticed you didn't mention the John Gierach, who's always one of my favorite authors. I guess that's more of an instructional book than a he's
Yeah,
not so much on the philosophical side.
well, he actually is. I mean, he actually is. He's one of the more prolific writers for sure, and I think one of the more humorous writers. He's very subtle. There is in the book club we are going to be reading a couple of chapters from Gierach, and yeah, he's certainly very prolific. Great writer.
I've noticed I tend to like his earlier stuff better when he was writing when he was sort of my age. Now he talks a lot about being in biplanes and going to Alaska and Canada pretty frequently, which is a little out of my price range. So
yeah.
he isn't as relatable as he used to be, I guess.
Yeah. He also writes I'm pretty sure, a regular essay in the Trout Unlimited magazine. So if any of you get that, check it out. They're like, 2 or 3 page essays about places he's gone. He's a great writer, very, very accessible, very sort of quick and easy to read. So yeah, we'll read some of his. Has everybody, I'm curious, I've probably seen the movie, but have many people read A River Runs Through It, the short story? Fair amount of nods. If you haven't, it's 100 pages. It's a night or two read. And aside from the fact that the movie and Robert Redford made it so popular, I think there are reasons why it's still one of the greatest fly fishing pieces of fly fishing literature. So if you haven't, I recommend picking it up and reading it or rereading it. It's short.
Yeah, see, if I remember reading a book about bonefish down off the Keys, that was very, very interesting. And it wasn't so much about reflection, like as you were mentioning here, but it's more about theory and how you go about, and tact, and how you go about doing the fishing itself. But very good read. It was a short one too, probably 100 pages. So that was good though.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. One of the classes I taught, there are a mixture of people in the classes who tend to be anglers and just people who just like the literature, and they don't fish, men and women, by the way. And one of the guys in the class pointed out, and he was absolutely right, and to sort of Dan's point, that a lot of this reflective literature really doesn't get written about, not a whole lot about saltwater fishing. It doesn't get written a whole lot about large salmon fishing, like in the Northwest, and a lot of steelhead. Some of it is. it's really about, sort of the quiet streams and trout fishing. So there are certain aspects of fly fishing that really aren't covered by this. The waters are different. This tends to be written about waters that are in some ways, smaller waters, but not the big, huge streams. So depending on what kind of fly fishing you do, some of this you just won't find this literature. So, and to Dan's point, that's when it comes to saltwater fishing, and tarpon and bone and permit, you won't find a lot of this, but you'll find a lot of great literature on people who do it for sure. Well, I don't want to keep anybody again. Thanks again. I really appreciate the time. And you've got my contact information. Be happy to talk more about this in any way. Or if you want more information on, the upcoming book club or anything else, please feel free to call or write. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot,
Steve.
Steve. And yeah, I'll be sure
Appreciate
to post your book list and the information about the book club on the Ozark
Terrific.
website. So that should be up there in the next
Terrific.
day or two.
Good. And I hope to see everybody a little bit more now that I've got a little bit more time away from the office, as they say.
For sure.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and guys, this meeting we are recording, so I'll get it posted to YouTube in the next day or two. Then it'll also be up on the website if anybody wants to go back. Other than that, Dan, you want to close us out?
Any burning desires to talk about something else? I think we're done here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye.